Okay, our video is recording. Hello to everyone out there on the Sleepy Reader YouTube channel. This is going to be the live, or not live, but you'll see us record live the podcast Never Stay Dead, and then there will be an edited version that goes up as audio on on iTunes and all of that, Spotify and everything. So, and for anyone who doesn't know who Matt is, Agent 42Q, his real station's name, though, or channel's name is Wednesday Serial. And you just did a monster long video. And I just did a video almost as long on my channel, but a monster long video on, excuse me, Inferno, which we actually chatted about a little bit on our last hangout together.
That's right. Yeah. And then your monster video is just like picks of the week, right?
This morning or this afternoon, I also released a 48-minute long, quote, sleepy vlog where I showed some books and talked a little bit about a few other things.
I didn't even get notified on that one. All right.
I don't know how it went so long. But yeah, then the day before I released my picks of the week. I think. Did I do it Saturday or did I do it Friday? I think I did it Saturday.
Right.
So
I missed my trademark.
Well, we haven't started the podcast yet.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, so this time it's Matt's pick, not of the week, but pick of the podcast. So that means he introduces the podcast. Whenever you're ready, Matt, you can just launch into it.
All right. Konbanwa, Damian-san, ogadashita.
Okay, I understood everything you said.
Great. So welcome to another Never Stay Dead. Tonight's or today's, depending on your listening pleasure, scintillating tale that we're going to be covering is known simply as Wolverine, or I guess I should say Marvel's Wolverine. And this is the 4-issue mini that was Claremont's first breakout from taking X-Men characters and doing more than just Uncanny. And so this was something of a landmark moment, not only because of all that, but also because it was Claremont who was at the top of his game at this point, along with, this up-and-comer Frank Miller.
And I think Miller had come up very fast.
Yes.
And I looked at the time that this first issue came out of Wolverine #1. Miller had still about 5 or 6 issues left in Daredevil. So he must have done his last issues of Daredevil and Wolverine around the same time, roughly.
Well, when you say his last issues, you mean his initial run, or when he was
of his initial run before he left Marvel to go do Ronin. So he left Marvel, did Ronin. I'm not sure if he came back to Marvel and did more Daredevil before doing the Batman Dark Knight's Returns, or if then he came back to Daredevil after Batman Dark Knight's Return.
Couldn't tell you.
But so this is both the peak and near the end of his first kind of run at Marvel. Because he basically became a superstar within the little comics world within a couple of years.
And I believe you read the same intro I did of Claremont talking
Chris
about
Claremont,
it.
yes.
Yeah. And Chris Claremont was kind of bemoaning the fact that Frank Miller seemed to take to the act of writing right out the gate, seemingly, and also was this rock star artist.
Right. And he talks a lot about what a great writer Miller is, and then talks about how they were on a 6-hour car ride together in which they talked about Wolverine and kind of came up with the basic ideas or the basic approach to this series. And that's what convinced Miller to go ahead and do it, because at first he didn't want to draw any Wolverine.
I found really confusing because Claremont's saying that Frank Miller didn't want to do a character that was just like berserker rage and, just this anger cannon pointed in the way he goes, well, Miller would want to do something like that. And I'm thinking like, well, this is the guy who did Sin City. That doesn't ring true to me. So I thought it was odd. Oh. You muted. You muted yourself.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Okay, now I didn't mute myself on purpose. I don't know what happened. My Audacity crashed. Some other weird things happened. So I'm going to have to, excuse me while I quit something. I'm going to have to edit this directly from this audio from the video.
Okay.
I won't have 2 tracks after all, which is kind of a bummer. But there you go. So what were we saying? I'm sorry, as my computer.
Oh, I was just saying in the intro, Claremont was talking about how Frank Miller didn't want to do a character that was just, a berserker rage and a danger to everyone around them. Just anger. And so I thought that was odd because this is the guy who went on to go do Sin City. So.
Right. It seemed strange that he was not interested in Wolverine. And who knows what, Frank Miller's memory of that conversation might have been. He might have viewed it quite differently. Maybe he was interested. But that's what he made Chris Claremont think at the time, that he wasn't interested.
Well, and it's also funny, I think you pointed this out too, that Chris Claremont was going about how they came together on this story and what they wanted to tell and writing it through. And then you get to the credits.
And he just we get to the credits and it is not credited as co-plotted or anything like that.
Right.
And Claremont's just at the end of his introduction just talks about, writers and what writers do, and doesn't sort of swing back to the fact that he and Miller seem to have come up with it together. And maybe I'll come back to that. In my eyes, this feels more like a Miller project than a Claremont project in a way.
Okay.
On a lot of levels, not every level, but yeah. Is there anything more you wanted to say, kind of introductory to this? Or
well, I thought that writing bit was interesting about how Miller took to the act of writing and whatnot. And we've covered a lot of Miller's earlier works in some of our other episodes. And we covered some of Claremont's earlier work in X-Men. And I thought it was funny how we talk about how we liked a lot of the Miller stuff, but that early Claremont stuff, I was kind of pointing to, this doesn't feel like Claremont yet. And it would seem he would tend to agree that he was still, getting his chops and figuring it out.
Right. So, I mean, he may just be being nice to Frank Miller, but it seems like he's saying Frank Miller developed as a writer much more quickly than I did.
I mean, I think that's apparent in the work.
That's fair. Yeah. Well, and Frank Miller sort of hit the scene, I guess, within the level of mainstream comics as fairly revolutionary, and Claremont was maybe more evolutionary within that context of things.
Yeah.
He at the time probably did not feel like a radical change, but you slowly realized he was doing something different than other writers had done in the past.
Well, and Claremont kept going and going and going,
yeah.
And whereas Miller fell off, basically.
Yeah. Miller became, well, he sort of took the superstar route, whether or not, even though Claremont was a superstar too, of just everything he did was a special event. He didn't do regular comics past this point.
Mm-hmm.
So you said something in Japanese, I think, which I assume was because almost the entirety of this book takes place in Japan, except for the first few pages.
Right.
And I don't know if it introduces the idea that Wolverine is almost Japanese, as one character says. He's not quite Japanese, but he's very close for a Westerner.
Yeah, he's as Japanese as a Westerner can be, basically.
Right.
And
had that? Do you think that had occurred earlier in the X-Men, or is this news to? It was news to me, I think, when I read it, but I don't recall if there was something else.
Well, I mean, to that level, this would be relatively new, I'd imagine. I haven't read all the issues, so maybe I'm missing something,
Right.
but I do know the X-Men had gone to Japan, and immediately Claremont established that Wolverine had some sort of connection to Japan because he's sitting there looking at a newspaper and talking to Cyclops about some event that happened, and Cyclops like, why don't you know more? Because he knew a little bit about an event that had just happened. And Wolverine says, I only know what the newspaper is telling me. You can read Japanese? Yeah, bub. I didn't know that. You never asked.
Right.
So
Yeah, so maybe I'd have to go back to figure out whether Claremont had weaved that stuff in.
I feel like he was building it and there's that Japanese connection there, but I mean, we never really explored it until this. And
Right.
there's certainly levels to that. And I've heard some professionals talk about it on the what is it, the Pull List podcast with Agent M. They brought in Ryan Stegman to talk about Wolverine not too long ago, and they briefly mentioned, this whole Japanese connection, how that was really set up with the story.
And is Mariko, like, there was a female Japanese character who, in some brief moment when they were in Japan, had an interaction with him, but I didn't go back to check if that was the same.
I did. It is Mariko, and they meet in a garden, and he's just kind of entranced with her beauty, but it's a really light connection, and she almost seems like a different character than the one that we find in this book, but it is her. There had to be more between this book and that initial meeting, but I haven't come across that yet.
So, I mean, because the driver of the plot is that Wolverine is madly in love with Mariko, and she loves him too, but he discovers that she stops communicating with him and refuses to see him or answer his calls. And so he travels to Japan and discovers that she has gotten married to a man chosen by her father, who had been absent for years or decades, suddenly showed up and says, you have to marry this man. So she, for Japanese honor, marries the man without any question. And I think in this first issue, Wolverine discovers that that her husband beats her. And as he goes to, he wants to beat up the husband, but Mariko won't let him. And then he ends up in a fight with Mariko's father, Lord Shingen.
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce these things.
That's
Lord Shingen. And amazingly, Lord Shingen defeats him. And, or amazing to me, he seems to easily defeat him. He cheats a little with some poison on the blades and stuff. But it was a wooden blade, so that's a little unclear to me.
Yeah. So, are we just doing the quick overview?
This is what happens in the first issue. So I'm just one more thing in the first issue is then he's kind of, after he's defeated, he's thrown out the window and he's pretty much a mess and can hardly move. And some thugs come to cut him up and beat him up or whatever they want to do and rob him. And some mysterious woman comes along and rescues him by throwing knives into the bad guys and killing them. Right. And that's the end of issue 1. So it's kind of the overall is kind of the fall. This issue is the first issue is the fall of Wolverine, in a way. Right.
Well, you got to establish threats and what's going to be a problem for this guy.
But he's going to fall even further. Although, the whole story starts with a kind of prelude where Wolverine hunts down a maddened bear who's been killing people, and he kills the bear rather gruesomely because we see his, especially for, I think this might be the only blood shown in the comic is the bear's blood. A little bit. He actually whacks the bear's arm right off, and then he kills the bear, and then he goes and hunts down the hunter who shot poison arrows at the bear. Which I guess is parallel to him being poisoned later.
The reason he hunts the bear is because the bear's been driven mad and it's taken out like a couple families and some other passerbys. And so he has to hunt the bear because he's been called in to do so, basically. But he realizes what happened was that the bear was poisoned, and so he goes and gives his level of justice to the hunter who did that. And he basically said the murder was on that hunter's hands more so than the bear's.
Right.
And so there's a few things established there. I mean, how canny he is and how able he is to fight a grizzly bear. But I mean, also his idea of understanding and working through, but also this kind of like animalistic side of the character. Because Claremont's trying to set up this idea of the failed samurai, but before we even get there, we have to get to the base of Wolverine, which is Canadian, which I want to ask you about this. Does this fit more of a mold of Canadian that was in pop culture at the time, somewhere of this like outdoorsman kind of idea? Because
yeah, like Canada is more like a wilderness or frontier.
Yeah.
When this came out, I was 20 years old, maybe. I'm not sure what clear picture I had of Canada at the time.
Mm-hmm.
There was some comedians who played Canadians, and they were always wearing flannel shirts and down vests and things like that. So there was a sense of them being kind of rough and ready outdoors people, but kind of goofballs too, in the popular media at the time.
Right. Yeah, I'm just not imagining Wolverine saying sorry, eating ketchup chips and poutine, and I don't know.
This could be as much a cliche of the Rocky Mountains in the eyes of people who don't live in Colorado as Canada, I would think.
Yeah, I mean,
mountains and wild animals and bears and hunters and stuff like that.
Yeah,
lodges where people are drinking and wearing flannel shirts.
I mean, I could see that kind of bar up, mountain towns not too far from where I live.
So, I don't know how, I didn't think about this with Canada, but I definitely thought in terms of Japan, like how much does Chris Claremont know about Japan? How right on is he about all this honor stuff and everything?
Well, and that's what I was going to say is I think the weakest part of this story is Yukio. This whole honor bound thing that you were talking about with her needing to appease
Mariko, you mean? Mariko. Yukio is the
sorry, I got ahead of myself.
We only learn who she is in the second issue.
Spoilers. So Mariko's, married to this man because her father wanted her to be. So it's something about honor, but it's also business and all that. But
right. And the idea that are they nobility? Is there Japanese nobility still, and do they still follow like some ancient rules and everything, or is this all just pulp fiction in a sense?
I mean, this was the 80s, so I mean things have changed since what I know.
And I don't mean to put you under too much pressure. I know you know more about Japan than I do, but that doesn't make you the world's greatest expert on Japan.
Hardly. But I mean, the idea that there are certain families and that there are still some castles around is true. How many are privately owned still? There's still some. There are still like private graveyards around that you can trip into and things like that. Like this would be, but I mean, they do kind of get to this when we come back to X-Men away from this mini. I mean, she's essentially nobility. Like this would be like you ending up with someone who has a grand mansion in America. It would be very ornate. It would be a lot. Like this is a big deal.
Right.
And so that's part of the reason why it almost makes sense for her to be like this. But I feel like it doesn't read as well today as it did back then. Because I mean, this is closer to a British story about people needing to keep appearances and their stance in society. And it just feels more alien now to me.
Right. Yeah. Well, and as we quickly realize that her father is kind of like a Japanese kingpin or something. Mm-hmm. That also made me wonder, was he ever really nobility, or is he just like this criminal who claims to be noble?
Well,
and we never learn his background or how he got to be what he is or anything like that. At least not here.
I mean, there's some of that I think you just kind of hit on with it. He's has some stance nobility, but it is partially through what are illegal dealings, but that isn't so far off. But there isn't a lot of like Yakuza tie here's and whatnot, which would be very possible. They end up going much more superhero with it, which is fine. But I thought this scene, although that top right panel you're looking at there,
this one
I think
here
is the worst line in the entire thing.
Right hand one, the next one.
Yeah. Where with Boken, a wooden practice sword, like either have Boken and then like have a little caption, a wooden practice sword, or say a wooden practice sword, but saying that's just clunky. I know it's a nitpick, but
I think I was so used to that kind of thing in comics where there'd be little explanations in the dialogue that I don't even notice it. Right?
Yeah. But this idea that, they're in a kendo match basically, and, I used to be good with a sword, but, he's a master and he handily takes care of Wolverine despite his physical advantages kind of works here, because part of what's hampering Wolverine is that he's not willing to go to his normal, more bestial fighting stance, and for it he loses.
That's a very good point, that he's holding back, except that they don't emphasize that he's holding back, so it makes it seem more like he's a superhero being beaten by an older man who just happens to be well versed in swordplay.
Until this point where he throws away the sword and he comes at him with the claws, and they start talking about how he's being a bit dishonorable and doing this, and the guy's still able to handle him because he's a kendo master. I mean, mastering that spacing and hitting all that, like, it doesn't matter if Wolverine can heal a bit more if he's just getting thwacked on and he can't touch the guy.
Well, for me, it's one of those things that you just have to accept, that I had a little trouble accepting at first, especially as the comic went on in the next issues. Can I talk about what happens in issue 2 yet, or do you want to just stay focused on issue 1?
Well, I just want to hit on this a little bit more. The reason why I think this reads is partially because Wolverine wasn't the way we understand Wolverine now, where he can heal back from like a single limb or a single atom or wherever they're at nowadays, right?
This is a much more believable healing process that Wolverine has now. It takes some time, possibly a day or two, to heal from things.
But if there's a lethal blow, he'd be done.
Right. They talk about wanting to cut his heart out,
right,
as a way to make sure he stays dead.
But the fact that he loses so dishonorably by casting away his sword and doing this and then getting tramped, with this, he loses in the eyes of his lover his honorability, and it's essentially over, which was that fall you're talking about. So, yeah.
Right. And they say he's an animal in human form. And then he's knocked into unconsciousness, and then he's saved by this strange woman who says, "You are mine, Wolverine, now and forever." And that's dun dun dun, the end of the issue.
Isn't that what we all want?
Yes, I've been waiting for you to say that to me. And then at the beginning of issue 2, he just wakes up from blackness, and the woman's slapping him to wake him up, and they're being attacked by large numbers of ninja from the Hand, which is supposedly in the Marvel universe now, as created by Frank Miller already in Daredevil, the most deadly group of ninja assassins in the world, right?
Right.
So here's what confuses me. This woman who had to save him now needs him to save her against overwhelming odds. There's a beautiful picture right here, by the way, on the double page spread on the second page, where a Wolverine smashing through the window and facing, probably at least a dozen ninjas are on the page, some with bows and arrows, some with swords. So anyway, suddenly he's more of a superhero, I felt like.
Mhm.
In the previous issue, he had trouble or could not defeat one man who was, a master of his martial art. But now he's facing a score or more of masters of martial arts, and he's slaughtering them by the pound.
Well, it's the transitive property of ninjas. The more there are, the less powerful they are until you get to the last one, and then you have that, big heroic duel.
Right. Well, anyway, I mean, all of this can be explained away. It just sort of took me aback a little bit because I was saying, oh, they made him more human and easy to defeat, and suddenly he seems unbeatable again. And he's just woken up from unconsciousness, but and he has to rescue this woman. That's the other thing. Maybe she's letting him rescue her, because later we see her fight off large numbers of ninjas by herself also.
Well, and we know that she's putting him in a position from later in the book, but I don't know if we want to talk about that yet.
Okay, well, I'll just quickly, they then go to his hotel room, and somewhere along the lines, we learn her name is Yukio.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I have my notes there. And she wants him to sleep with her, and he won't because of Mariko. But she convinces him to help her with this mission to, how does she put it exactly? To fight, or maybe that comes later. I'm sorry. But she convinces him to come help her on a mission to assassinate another mobster, Yakuza type.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, we learn that she actually works for Lord Shingen, the father of Mariko, the evil, possibly noble dude who abuses her completely and tells her she has to use Wolverine to kill their target and then kill Wolverine too.
Mm-hmm.
And we get all through this, we get really cool art. And I don't think the inker Rubenstein was right for Frank Miller that way. So sometimes he sort of emphasized the clumsiness of Frank Miller's figures. But it's been a while since I've read some Frank Miller. And as I was going through this, maybe since the last time you and I did some Daredevil, I was just thinking every time I would look at a panel, he not only is a master at arranging the panels on the page, but he's a master of the composition within each panel. Each panel is a mini sort of compositional masterpiece, I think, of comic book storytelling. But his actual figure art, his actual draftsmanship is probably on the lower side in terms of great comic book artists. I don't know. I just thought of that as I was looking at this page here, which I thought had one great panel after another.
What I think stands out more with Miller, especially in this book, even compared to his others, is the backgrounds and the setting has so much love and care put into it. You can feel where they are, where they're at in a castle, or eventually like dealing with the Shinkansen or whatever. It's just, there's a lot of feeling in that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think of that. I was just thinking of the sort of the storytelling and the layouts and everything. But I mean, the story just, to me, visually just moves and moves and moves. And there's a lot of violence and a lot of action in this. I wonder if this was at the time, because it's still Comics Code Authority and it's 1982. I wonder if this was one of the most violent comics at the time, even though we never really see much in the way of blood, even though lots of people are stabbed and cut and slashed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably.
But so he and Yukio break their way into the person that Wolverine thinks is the bad guy that they're taking out's castle, where Mariko and her husband are also there in a negotiation with this guy, I guess for her father, or pretending to do it for her father, so that they can set him up to be assassinated. And so we just get a lot of cool fight scenes. And Mariko witnesses Wolverine going into berserker mode, and then she is horrified with him, and that, in theory, is the end of their ever having love. She utterly disdains him, and the issue ends with Yukio thinking that she's got him. She's got Wolverine now as her lover, I guess, because Mariko's so horrified by him.
Right.
Although we still know that she's supposed to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't quite sure at the end of this issue if she was going to become his lover or kill him.
Why not both?
Yes, which is what it turns out. Well, no. It seems she wants to keep him alive, we find in the next issue.
Mm-hmm.
But so actually Wolverine is continued his fall in issue 2 by having Mariko see him in even worse light. And then at the beginning of the issue 3, he's really at the bottom. He's basically a drunken brawler at illegal fights in, whatever nightclubs have illegal fights in them. I've never stumbled across an illegal nightclub.
Really?
They're probably all over the place in Tokyo, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because that's far away and exotic.
Yeah. Well, it was also the 80s.
Right. And his friend, who's a secret agent in Japan, tries to kind of pull him in and get him to go on a mission with him, and in a sense, reaching out to him for some redemption. And Wolverine turns him down. Mm-hmm. There's another great splash page. Stan Lee presents Loss. Mm-hmm. But only the people watching the video can see that splash page. It's really let's see.
Well, and here's another one of those settings I'm talking about. They're on the Shinkansen tracks, and you can really see it.
So that rings true to you, what we're seeing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a scene where we see how crazy Yukio is. She wants to go have sex on the railway tracks just before the train's about to arrive. Mm. And it's a bullet train that's going 300 miles an hour.
Right. Which
gives Frank Miller more chance to do beautiful compositions. But
and I mean, there I think we really have it established, like she's appealing to Wolverine's animal side versus we have appealing to his better nature.
Right. Mariko is the side of him that wants to be civilized and whatnot. So and then the rest of the main action of this issue is a whole bunch of the hand ninjas again are sent to kill them, this time for real. Apparently before it was just for show to convince Wolverine to help her fight on her side. Mm-hmm. But now the hand ninjas are supposed to kill them both because Lord Shingen is tired of her not obeying his commands to kill Wolverine.
Right.
And he ends up after a lot of fighting. Well, actually, he realizes that she has killed his friend, the Japanese secret agent. So he goes after her, but in the process, the ninjas show up, and we have a big fight with ninjas in a Japanese Zen garden. Mm-hmm. And after defeating all the ninjas there, he has a moment of deep philosophical realization that he is still himself and that he is a man after all, and he's going to go act like a man.
And just because he makes mistakes, it doesn't mean that he isn't a man.
Right.
It just means that he's pushing through, which is interesting because, I mean, this is supposed to be a big moment of revelation for the character and taking him away from being such the bestial character to being a more balanced character. And apparently there was some letters decrying this decision, saying, Wolverine's supposed to be a certain way, and this is character growth. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, it's character growth, at least in this miniseries, right? Does it stick?
I think it does a bit, and until you get to Larry Hama, doing Wolverine than they do a lot more of the bestial stuff. But yeah,
and I read a lot of Larry Hama. But and I think always, I think the point of Wolverine is that bouncing back and forth between civilization and wildness. Maybe at first he was just a foil to the civilized side of the other X-Men, but when you want to examine him as a character on his own, he has to have that struggle. He has to have those two sides, or he's not an interesting character. I guess that goes back to Frank Miller at first thinking he didn't want to do Wolverine. Maybe not because he was against an ultra-violent character, but he was against a one-sided character, perhaps.
Right. Supposedly. Yeah. I think Wolverine's evolved beyond this at this point, though. But this was also decades ago, and he's had how many comics?
So many.
Right.
And it's the case with all the big superheroes they've been taken in every direction possible over time.
Right.
Unfortunately. And then we get the ultimate issue. All of these issues have these really great covers, which were kind of unusual covers at the time because they're just a single figure. And I don't think you saw that in covers back then. Usually there was an expectation that covers would be real storytelling covers with, a scene acted out on the cover.
I didn't think of that. That's cool. Yeah.
So I don't know if this started, was one of the early examples of what I call the posters type of cover, but it may be, at least at Marvel. So in the final issue, Wolverine basically dismantles Lord Shingen's crime apparatus, right? He tears apart his drug trade and whatever other crime things he does. We're given just a little bit of that, and then we have Lord Shingen, worrying I've got to take care of this Wolverine. He's destroying everything.
Yeah.
And it's pretty basic, right? He goes to fight Lord Shingen. Yukio is. By this point, Mariko has realized her father is evil and is starting to say, maybe there isn't honor in doing everything he tells me to do. And Yukio is following Wolverine as he enters the fortress of Lord Shingen. And in the course of all the tussling, she kind of saves Mariko's life. So that makes up somewhat for Wolverine's desire to kill her, for her having earlier killed his friend, the Japanese secret agent. And Wolverine gets his big battle with Lord Shingen, the father of the woman he loves, and he kills him.
Which all these pages that you're going by, I feel are defined by action only, but also there's a bit of negative space on each page.
You're right.
That's taken advantage of, which I think this issue I feel is where we got Frank Miller standing out.
The action drawing Frank Miller, yeah.
Well, and before that, there's the sequence where he's chasing Yukio, I believe, or maybe that was in the third issue. I'm sorry.
He chases Yukio in the third issue, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is also very visually stunning.
Yeah, and then there was some really cool stuff there. But in this page here, it gets the idea I wanted to talk about where the details of the background are pretty minimal, but they're there to establish what's needed for the action. Okay, they're on this wooden bridge, so there's going to be some sounds, some tactile ideas, but there's also the layer right under the bridge. So that idea of deception, or the net, you get a little bit of texture of it, but then the scale of it and so on. It's just it's exactly the visual information you need for.
Well, and he uses all this visual information also in a highly artistic compositional way. This isn't just seeing a net capturing a woman. It's a whole designed panel. And then each one of the panels on this page that we're looking at, each one has its own sort of design element and its composition that guides your eye in a different way through the panel. So it heightens the action beyond just displaying the action. The design work, I think, gives it sort of an emotion and an excitement
Totally.
that most other artists don't usually try to go for or even think about, I suspect.
Right. And it's funny to tell, you can tell where the comics more Miller and more Claremont simply by the amount of word balloons, shoved in. Like, that's a Claremont page.
Right. Well, one presumes they worked with supposedly a plot from Claremont, then Miller drew it, and then Claremont came back and put in dialogue where he felt it was needed. Mm-hmm. But I bet, we'll never know, but I bet that if there was a plot written up by Claremont, that Miller changed a lot.
Right.
It just feels so Miller to me. And I guess we both read the follow-up issues in the X-Men where Mariko and Wolverine almost get married.
Yeah, they feel
completely different to me in terms of the writing.
They are, but
it's like a different writer was writing, which is what really led me to think that that Frank Miller was somehow steering the boat here.
But more so than other minis or other like tie-ins or whatever, we have this image that we end on, which, by the way, guys, when I finished the story, I just sent a message that said, "Hey, Elf, don't forget the beer." And Damian was like, "What?"
I hadn't finished reading it yet. I thought you had sent me a text message to the wrong person. Like you had a friend that nicknamed Elf over there in Colorado that you could have beer with that night.
I wish. But what's funny is this image is more or less reproduced on the cover of the X-Men issue that, yes, follows.
X-Men 172. Except
the image is so much more... I think that closing image is the worst image Frank Miller did for the entire mini. This cover just looks so much better.
Yeah, I agree. What is this thing doing to me? Yeah. Yeah, it's not that last page where the X-Men are receiving an invitation from Wolverine. It almost took me out of the story. It just it didn't have the same energy.
Well, it was an epilogue, basically. Yeah. It's the last little page to take this tale that we've had and move it into the continuity so that we can continue.
Right. I felt like for 4 issues we got Wolverine as a Frank Miller character with a little bit of softening from Chris Claremont, but it has that doomed, romantic, violent kind of vibe that we've seen in a lot of Frank Miller, from Daredevil to what do you call it, Sin City, and some other stuff Miller's done, but particularly Daredevil and Sin City. It felt in the tune with those series.
Well, I mean, the whole doomed love angle feels right at mark with Claremont too, though, which we get in the issue 3 issues after.
Well, but the doomed love with Claremont, or any love with Claremont, is kind of talky, and I don't know, it feels at a lower level than the operatic, violent level of stuff in Miller, to me. I'm sure this is truly a collaboration between them, but I just sort of suspect they should have said, co-created or co-plotted by Miller and Claremont, not just Claremont.
Sure.
As writer and Miller as penciler.
Though I think Chris Claremont goes more for the soap than the opera, I guess, if you will.
Right. And Miller goes more for the opera. And the other thing is, things in Miller happen very fast. You establish the love in a few pages and then you shatter it a few pages later. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think the Claremont way would be to build up for a long time and then have a slower shattering too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and it could be the same amount of pages, but those pages would take place in different comics because you'd have this thread going and then it might echo something happening elsewhere. Yeah.
So part of it might be the nature of doing a miniseries focused on just one character rather than writing a group comic.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I think, however people are credited, the Marvel method means that the writer is responding to the way the artist drew things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a lot why I, as a kid, followed artists, not writers, because if the right artist was on it, it was exciting, and the writer wrote more exciting stuff to go with it than if a duller artist was on a comic, I think.
Fair enough.
And so even because of the Marvel method, even the writing would change depending on how the art paced things out.
Yeah. I mean, and I think you see that when we get to the Uncanny issues by comparison, that are following direct plot lines and dealing with a lot of the same characters, but just feels different.
Yeah, it feels more, I don't know, more civilized.
Sure. But I still think, this is beautiful. There's composition. There's still even some use of negative space, which I don't remember seeing in many comics even around the time.
Right. And Paul Smith, who did the work on about a year's worth of X-Men at the time, was very celebrated, and everyone was very excited over his art. It seems less exciting to me now, but I remember everyone thinking it was very cool. So.
That if you go back one, that Silver Samurai setup panel, that's beautiful, and that's really textured and great. I really like his stuff. I think it's, personally, I like it a little more than Miller's.
Well, he is a better artist in terms of the actual drawings, but he's quite a good storyteller, but I don't find as much energy in his storytelling as Miller. So I prefer Miller.
Right. That's fair. I think there's a lot of energy, especially when you see stuff like that dynamic Wolverine diving in or Storm swooping through.
Figures always seem to be kind of small in Smith's panels.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we get to continue the story of Yukio, Wolverine, and Mariko in these two issues.
Right. And we also get a big character moment for Rogue,
where Rogue becomes a punk rocker. And she's very influenced by Yukio, apparently.
That's Storm, right?
Storm. Did I say Rogue? Sorry, I meant Storm. You were talking about Rogue, and I was talking about Storm. Right?
Well, and what's interesting about that, too, is I've read an essay talking about how that Yukio and Storm moment is supposed to be sexually charged. And I'm reading this again, and I'm like, I just don't.
Right.
I don't see it.
People love to read into things, I suppose.
Right.
There's a lot more panels in the Smith stuff. And so you pack a lot more story into each issue.
This is a lot more Claremont, and so it feels like each issue is about the equivalent of 2 of something else. There's so many plot threads and character moments, and it all just goes.
But I feel the emotions, the tragedy, and the stuff is at a much higher level in the Miller issues than here. Even though in the final issue, to spoil it, Yukio dumps Wolverine at the altar, of course.
Right.
And someone has kind of hypnotized her or poisoned her mind.
It's Mastermind, and she's messing with her.
It looked like the shadow of Mastermind at some point. Although it kind of looked a little bit like Scott Summers' father.
Well, that's because Mastermind's, pretty version of himself is also brown hair and all that, but Corsair is actually handled in those.
Mastermind was disguised as Corsair's father, because I can't remember the storylines of this era, even though I know I read them all.
But yeah, we get a lot of Japanese affectations in this story as well that are very on key. So I'm guessing Claremont had a fair amount of notes.
Yes. So if look at all the detail there. I'm guessing. Yeah, I don't know, because we know that Frank Miller was really into manga and was one of the earliest people to obviously take an interest in kind of the Asian scene and bring what he discovered into his comics. So I don't know if he stirred up Claremont's interest, or Claremont might have already also been into researching a lot about Japan, or spent time in Japan, for all I know.
Right. It would sure seem that Claremont did, and that precedes these issues by a lot as well. But Claremont was a military brat and traveled around a lot, so
okay,
he got a lot of that as he was growing. But yeah.
But it's so, like, I'm now looking at the page where Mariko rejects Wolverine, and it's so low key in my mind compared to the way things happened in the Miller issue. So this is, to me, it's a beautiful looking page, but it sort of illustrates to me the difference.
Well, and I feel like part of it's the story here, like part of it, and I think Mariko is just kind of a lame duck character. Like, she just does things for reasons that don't make sense to her or anyone else, but she feels honor bound to do them or whatever. And it's just, and that's it.
At this point, it's because she's been mentally manipulated.
Right. But we haven't seen any signs of it prior. So it just kind of comes where you're not worthy, Gaijin. And it's like, okay.
But in Wolverine solo things, there were big emotional moments where she watches him be a berserker and kill people and decides he's not worthy. Here it says, she says, there will be no wedding. He says, why? She says, because, Gaijin, you are not worthy. It seems like both, not just a failing of the artist, but a failing of Chris Claremont there too, of both of them to make this a big moment.
Well,
and this is where I think that Miller is a better storyteller than they are.
Well, I also think this is the miniseries versus the series ongoing, because here, this is a cliffhanger. You want to know why.
We'll come back to this.
We get Wolverine with the single tear. So sad.
Yes. But he appears to be a far less emotional, a much more emotionally controlled person here than in the solo book.
Right.
Well, the pair is totally different, but that's another thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I like this, and I like the pace and the way Claremont and Paul Smith tell the story. But just when I compare it side to side with Miller, it just seems so different. It seems like a whole different world of storytelling to me, I guess.
That's fair. I mean, it is in some ways, like I was saying, the mini and the ongoing, and there's definitely differences. There's no question.
Yeah.
But they look, I don't know, to me, they don't look so far apart.
Yeah, we kind of discussed off air that to you, the art styles between Miller and Smith don't seem that different, whereas to me, they seem wildly different. And I think that's the difference between growing up with when comics had a more limited sort of palette of art styles, especially Marvel comics. So to me, this seems like a very different drawing style. But to you, it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, it just looks very... I don't know. I mean, I could tell it's different people, but it looks fairly similar to me, I guess. I don't know. A lot of panels, though.
Yeah. So overall, I mean, do you think of this as the defining series for Wolverine that everything else was built on, or is this just an incremental step of a Wolverine that was already being well established in the regular X-Men comic, and then They just took a little side story that gave us a little more Wolverine.
Well, I don't think you could call this a little side story. Like, this is a big comic by any measure. And it was a big story for the character. It definitely drove him in a different direction. But I mean, it is more so than most minis, or like I think you want to talk about Magic next, right?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that be our next, since it was the next miniseries that Chris Claremont did.
Yeah.
Let's keep going. I just because I got all 4 of these issues just recently, so
Sure.
Although obviously I could have read them digitally all along. But
I got them.
Getting the 4 issues recently excited me to read them, especially as a follow-up to the Wolverine. And I think it'll dovetail nicely with all your reading of New Mutants, so you'll have a lot of information at your fingertips about what happens after these issues.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Inferno is the conclusion to this.
Oh, right.
But I mean, the Wolverine story is preceded by and dovetails immediately into X-Men. So I mean, it runs very parallel. And there's some considerations for that and kind of the continuity aspects that they play with, which are pretty minor because they really just have to establish Wolverine's gone for a while. And then the X-Men meet up with him again in that issue that we talked about. And then it continues. But it's so part and parcel with it that it was a big moment for the character. And so they pulled him out and did this. And then he continues. So it just feels very different. Whereas Ileana was kind of window dressing before and then became a bigger character as a result of the mini. Right. And it wasn't really a character in anything until over a year later.
Well, as I think about this and think back to when I first read it, this was in the nature of, early 1980s superhero stories. This was like Wolverine in his non-superhero life.
Mm-hmm.
And this was Wolverine. There was always hints of how violent Wolverine was, but this is showing us this is what Wolverine's world is like when he's not in the X-Men, and gives us lots of hints of what his life was like before he was in the X-Men. And so it was kind of even though in the larger scheme of things, it's pretty minor in terms of its deviation from the world of superheroes. It seemed like taking a superhero character and putting him into a more, not realistic, but into a different fictional context.
Well, and I have
kind of an exciting thing, an exciting moment. This was only the second miniseries Marvel ever did. And the other one was Contest of Champions, which to me really doesn't count. So I feel like it's their first real miniseries in terms of taking a character. And it's probably the success of this that then saw a whole succession of miniseries. They had a Vision and Scarlet Witch miniseries, and they had that Ileana miniseries, and they had a Cloak and Dagger miniseries.
Yeah.
It just kept coming after that as a way to explore these characters who normally would just be side characters or part of a group.
Well, it's how they test the water with some characters. They weren't sure if they wanted to give an ongoing. I mean, that's what they did with Deadpool.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the few characters that had 2 minis before they gave him an ongoing.
Well, that wasn't in the early 80s, though.
If it was like
Deadpool must have been created in the late 80s.
Yeah. Oh, no, it was later, but I'm saying that tradition continued for
I see.
a while.
Yeah.
But
I don't even know if they knew they were testing the water at this point. Like, I don't know if they were thinking maybe we'll have a long ongoing Wolverine series someday.
Well, so this was the first mini of Claremont, which I know from something else I was watching, was they were pushing Claremont to do spin-offs and more books because X-Men were hotcakes. They couldn't sell enough of them. So they wanted more. And Claremont wanted to keep the artistic quality up. Right. And so I imagine this was something of a compromise where it was something he wanted to do. He got to work with Frank Miller, which I'd imagine he'd wanted to.
Right.
And
So it served Claremont's purposes, and it probably was more doable to work with Frank Miller for just 4 issues than take up his time, because he wants to write his own comics most of the time.
Right. And so I think maybe there's some happy accident there, but also the success of this created a mold that, then continued. How much the intent was there.
Yeah.
Who could say?
And of course, it's also, 81, 82 is when the comic book shops started taking off. And there you had a distribution system that was better suited to miniseries than when it was the spotty newsstand kind of thing, where you would do an ongoing story, but every issue you would have to write as people's first issue. Although I notice Claremont doing it very well in every issue of this Wolverine mini, of just bringing you up to speed really quickly in a panel or two. He's gotten much better at it than he was in the earlier X-Men, I would say.
Right. And to what you were saying earlier, I mean, I read this long ago and I didn't really like it at all, but I mean, reading it again and kind of knowing a bit more, like, this was establishing a lot for the character, and this was supposed to be more exotic, like the idea of them being in Japan wasn't, but the idea of them diving this deep, I guess, in the area and playing with that was big.
And it's all personal for Wolverine. There's no saving the world, or he's, just by accident getting rid of criminals, but that's not his goal, to clean up crime in Tokyo. He's just there because he's in love, and he's trying to work through his issues of, am I a man or am I an animal kind of thing.
Right. And to me, that's so like every Wolverine story. But of course it is, because this is the mold. And so it makes me appreciate a lot more, but I didn't have that. So I kind of read it back when and just kind of, whatever. And coming back to it, I find it a lot more incredible, but it takes now a little more knowledge, I think, to get there, because we're so used to this.
I had trouble getting back into this at first because I have a Wolverine block at this point. I have read too many Wolverine stories, and I recall quite strongly when I sort of came back to individual issue buying around 2010, 2011, and there were so many Wolverine comics out at that time.
Yeah.
And I would read some of them, and they were just so over the top and ridiculous, where 3/4 of his body has been destroyed and then it grows back in 10 minutes so he can keep fighting or something. And they were so, it went from, oh, by the way, shocking detail, Wolverine is a superhero who kills people, to just, yes, of course, he's constantly killing people. That's all he ever does. And I just sort of, I lost interest in Wolverine. But the last time I was a big fan of Wolverine, I guess, was during the Larry Hama series with Mike Silvestri drawing him.
Yeah, that was a while back.
Probably circa 89, 90.
Yeah.
So to me, that I'd been reading plenty of Wolverine, but anyway, I didn't think I disliked the character, though, until coming back at that point and just reading all these random Wolverine stories all over the place. And he was in many of the X titles, even if it was a group, he was the lead character. Like in, what was it called? Was it X-Force? Or
the
one that Rick wrote?
He's been in X-Force, X-Men, Wolverine, Avengers, New Avengers, Fantastic Four.
There was a plot line, I think, in X-Force that I remember reading back around that time, where he has to kill his own son. It's just, Wolverine is the guy who kills. And I just got kind of sick of that.
Well, and so did they, actually. One of the best runs with that was Jason Aaron dealing with that with Wolverine and the X-Men, where he became the headmaster.
I never read that. That's right. I sort of said, oh God, another Wolverine. But I heard that was a great series. I remember people liking it.
Yeah, and I think that was really good for the character. And right now, his current scribe, now that he's back from being dead, Benjamin Percy, I think is the best writer for the character, and did He worked on these 2 podcast told stories, Wolverine, The Long Night, and something Hunt. I don't know. You can go find them, but
So they're
great.
just stories told in a podcast, or they're come from a podcast and then turned into a comic book?
I think they were churned into a comic book at some point, but they were designed to be podcasts, and you can tell because they're not really done from Wolverine's perspective. They're done from these other characters, and they're trying to find Wolverine, and there's a lot to it, and they're really engaging. But Benjamin Percy's take on Wolverine is a lot more this mountain man, earthy, and very procedural storytelling, and it really fits the character and hits a method and mode that I'm really engaged in, always kind of waiting for that next issue more so than.
And is it still ongoing under Benjamin Percy?
Wolverine is ongoing, but right now it's in the middle of Hoxpox and currently the whole sword event. So it's
not the same.
It's different. And I'm getting all of them anyways right now. So
I remember hearing that Benjamin Percy was starting a new Wolverine series, and I'd had some mediocre experiences with Percy over at DC, so I didn't look into it.
That's fair.
But maybe I can, because I have Marvel Unlimited. I can read it at any time now.
Oh, there you go. It might be harder though, because it's so caught up in
continuity.
Yeah.
I think I'm more likely to want, if I find the time, to want to go revisit his Volume 2 miniseries, or not miniseries, regular series. What did that go for? More than 100 issues, I think.
Yep. Although before that, there was Kitty Pryden Wolverine.
Oh, was that a mini?
Yeah, it was 6 issues.
Maybe we can look at that if that was any good. Have you read that?
I haven't read it. I'm hoping to soon, but I need to finish my New Mutants run, which I'm in the last 20 issues. So,
because if there's a good Kitty Pryde mini, that's a good thing. I mean, I like Kitty Pryde when she's done right.
She's only been in a few minis, I believe, because there's that one. There's her as Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., and then there's one with her and one of the characters from Excalibur, and I'm spacing his name, but yeah, she's not been as prominent as a character until more recently, I feel. So they felt the need to highlight her, I guess, but it's a very different vibe with her.
Well, but meanwhile, we'll be back with Magic then. Let's see. Cool. There's a very cool, which is drawn by John Buscema, but I think later in the miniseries, Ron Frenz takes over. I didn't realize that at first. But there aren't many times when John Buscema drew the X-Men, so I was kind of excited by that.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad it's not Sal now.
Well, both John and Sal were very good, so either one is exciting.
That's fair, yeah. And then Friends, the old Spider-Man go-to.
Right. And Friends started out as kind of a mimic of Sal Buscema, I thought. But
not John?
Maybe a little bit of John. And then he switched to being a mimic of Jack Kirby for a while, and then I think he went back to his Sal Buscema type.
Well, if you have to mimic someone, I think Jack's the way to go.
If you've seen Ron Frenz's a Thor run, that's where he really looks like Jack Kirby, which makes sense. If you're going to imitate Jack Kirby, do it when you're doing Thor.
The most Friends artwork I've seen is in Spider-Girl.
But wasn't he on Spider-Man for a pretty long time?
Oh, yeah, he was. That was really...
With Roger Stern, or...
Mm-hmm. Stern and Friends, pretty classic run. And then, but I mean, he did a ton of Spider-Girl issues. That's how he's really known through the 90s.
Right. Yeah, no, I never read any of those. So I didn't realize he was on it that long. I knew he did some of it, but
yeah, no, Spider-Girl's having a little bit of a renaissance. I've seen a lot more people talking about that book randomly all of a sudden, and
I think things come back as people who were reading it in the 90s are now in their 30s or something, and then they start getting nostalgic about things from their youth. That's the first wave of nostalgia, I think, is in your 30s.
That's true, unless you're me, because I've been doing it earlier.
Right.
But I think there's also a bit of a reaction to, there's this Spider-Man mini going where J.J. Abrams' son was allowed to write it, and it's like Spider-Man's kid. But
I remember you complaining about that before.
Yeah. Well, I'm not the only one, and I think
I know you are. I know you're not the only one on that one. Sometimes you're alone in your opinions, but not in this case.
Right.
In fact, after people complaining about the first issue or two, I never even heard about the J.J. Abrams or J.J. Abrams' son's Spider-Man. Like no one, I assumed everyone just dropped it like a hot rock.
It got delayed.
Oh, okay. Right. COVID happened, of course.
Well, no. Before that, and then after that, it got delayed, and now we're getting a new issue, or one issue came out, and then we'll get one much later, and then they really bungled it.
You're still extremely doubled down on Marvel. It kind of amazes me. I am cutting. I mean, I didn't read that much Marvel to begin with, of current Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm cutting back even further.
It's mostly just the X books. I got wrapped up in Hoxpox, and that's the lion's share.
Well, all the X books and all the Spider-Man books, right?
Yeah.
Cut down on the Spider-Man.
Well, I mean, I'm getting all the Spider-Man books, but I mean, right now that's Amazing, Miles. I'm not getting Spider-Woman, so I guess there's that. And I'm getting Venom, but I like Venom on its own right now.
So, but with Venom, does that suck you into the whole Null thing that's coming up, and then you'll have to buy a lot of comics, or can you just buy Venom?
I'm going, well, I've been burned by events enough recently. So what I'm doing is I'm going, any books that I get and there's like a 3-issue mini, I'll get a tie-in. Mm-hmm. But I'm not going to get every corner of this event. I can't be bothered. But it did get me to read Thor, so I've been reading Thor.
Yeah, Thor's probably the next one. I've bought but not read the last 5 issues of Thor, so I need to read those and decide if I want to keep that.
Have you been trying Iron Man since it rebooted?
No, I had the vague idea of swinging back to it since it's Slott, right?
No, Slott's off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I had the vague idea of reading Slott's run digitally on Marvel Unlimited, but I haven't got around to it yet.
Okay. Fair enough.
I mean, in the 10 books that I read from New Comic Book Day last week, only one of them was a Marvel or DC comic. Can't remember what it was. Oh, it was Batman, and I just dropped it. I just dropped Batman.
Pretty sure Batman's DC.
Yes, Marvel or DC. What I'm saying is, everything else was at 9 indies and 1 corporate comic.
Rage Against the Machine, man.
Yes, Rage Against the Machine. Oh, that's silly. Oh no, never mind. I just thought I did something silly on the computer, but I didn't.
Oh, okay.
So, well, we will come back from the dead, as Wolverine has done at least a few times.
Yeah.
It does. I was listening to someone else, I guess, Kayfabe, talk about Weapon X by Barry Windsor Smith, and I'm tempted to go back and read that.
Is that those Marvel Comics Presents issues?
Yeah. So it was in 8 little 8-issue chapters.
Yeah, which is crazy because there's a ton of Wolverine and Marvel Comics Presents, and not a lot of people talk about most of those.
Right. Well, for the older readers at the time, it was exciting to see that artwork of an artist who had seemed to have left comics forever, and then, as they always do, they come back. The artists don't stay dead either. They always come back eventually in some form.
I'm waiting for Jack Kirby's next one.
It's coming. Okay, well, that's probably the end of the podcast.
Cool.
Any other interesting things going on with you in comics?
I'm trying to think.
Have you read everything you can read about Inferno or not?
I read all my Inferno issues. There's technically 2 other issues, I think, that were connected that I didn't read. Like there's a damage control issue. Yeah, plus once I got through a lot of the scruff, like the Avengers issues, when I didn't care. The X-Men stuff was fun. The Spider-Man stuff was fun in its own separate way. And then is done. I don't know. It was a bit much. And I really kind of want to come back and push through New Mutants to be done with that run. But in there's one issue by Louise Simonson that like accidentally is a weird commentary on like superhero movies. Like it really made me think about the way people perceive and go about that. And I don't know, it's just a really cool issue.
Before there were any superhero movies, I see.
Right.
Except for the Superman movies, probably.
Yeah. What else? I mean, I went out of my way to get a copy of The Last Ronin because it was pulled out of my shipment. So I've got to get another copy. I guess I couldn't wait. What?
They pulled it out of your shipment?
Yeah, they said they got shorted, so there's going to be one in my next shipment. I'm like, does that mean I'm getting a second print or something? No. So
that was going for big bucks on eBay because they didn't print enough copies. And that started speculators saying, oh, they didn't print enough copies, and I'm going to run out and grab what copies I can and sell them for more on eBay. So I'm a little disappointed that DCBS would do that to you.
Yeah, well, especially because I emailed them about this comic twice already. And then they emailed me like right before and they're like, oh, well, it'll come next month. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just going to go to the comic shop. I'm going to buy myself a copy at full price and I'll have it.
And you find a copy.
Oh, well. Yeah,
my comic shop got 8 copies and they sold in the first hour. And I arrived like 2 hours later. And I was kind of relieved because I didn't know if I wanted to get it or not, but it saved me $10.
I mean, I like it. I don't love it.
You've already read it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, you actually got a hold of it. I thought you meant you were going to get a hold of it.
No, I went and bought it and have it. That was the whole idea. What's annoying is that they printed this like magazine size, so it doesn't fit anything.
Well, you should buy a magazine size box. You can put some of your other.
I have 4 of them. Most of them are Conan.
Right. And Spirit.
There's some Spirit, and then there's some old heavy metal. So there's room for it there. I don't know, but it's not quite as big as those magazines.
So it's somewhere in between. Okay, that's annoying.
Yeah, I don't know. I like it. I'm looking forward to the next. I just, after all the hoopla, I was expecting a little bit more, and it's kind of a thin deal. And they made a big deal about which turtle is it. I'm like, I already know. Once they said it's only one, I knew who it was. It could only be one. So it was, oh well.
Well, speaking of animals who fight, I've started dipping back into the first trade of Cerebus. And
what printing of the trade is that? Because the cover's different.
I think they called it the remastered edition, although it doesn't say any. Oh, there it does. It does say remastered edition on there.
What does that mean?
I think it just means that he had lost the original film or whatever for it and had to hire someone to redo it digitally so that he could print it again. And I think he had a Kickstarter for it, so he had to make it sound fancy. But I just, paid regular prices for it. And I'm not reading it in order. I'm just dipping through. So today I just read the one where Cerebus falls in love with Jaka.
Oh yeah.
And I'm struck at how primitive the art is.
He grows fast. By the time you get to the second phone book, it's a different guy.
Well, even later in the phone book, it grows a lot. And even the lettering is not very good in this story I was reading. What number issue was it? But it is very funny. he has a talent for just throwing out these jokes, but he doesn't draw them very well.
Mm-hmm.
Or it doesn't, that's, I don't know if the other editions, but it doesn't have the cover. So there's no covers in here. So I don't know what issue it is. It's called Secret. Maybe it'll tell me in that. It doesn't tell the issue numbers in the table of contents.
I remember slogging through that first phone book, and then I kind of got into the second one. I put it down because I had to get to some other stuff, and I never really picked Cerebus back up. It's one of those days I'll get to it. But I think I heard about that remastered, or I knew it was some other printing, and so I made sure to buy my collection before that happened, so I had all one kind of printing for my collection.
Right. Well,
it's better part of a shelf.
Does your collection show the covers, or do you probably don't remember?
Here, let me find out.
It irritates me that they don't show the covers. Because the cover art's usually pretty interesting on Cerebus.
Here we go. This
Sorry?
one's a little.
I need to make you big. Show it again. It looks very similar.
Yeah, no, I think you just have that bar on top.
Line at the top. Yeah, so I think there's nothing special about the remastered edition other than it's.
I imagine it's printed on better paper.
It's redigitalized. It's not as good paper or not as slick paper as you normally see in a trade, but
there is a contents page.
Yeah, that's what my contents page is. It doesn't tell you the issue numbers.
Oh, yeah. No. I mean, this is the first one, so you can count them pretty easy.
Yeah, so the one I read, I guess, was the sixth one, unless any of the ones in here aren't from the, unless any of them are just shorts from some other thing.
Right.
In the first few issues, I can recognize specific Barry Smith panels that he was ripping off.
That's funny.
Yeah. So he was, instead of, having a comic book artist that has a lot of reference or whatever, his reference was entirely Barry Smith drawings. Like that skeleton there, I recognize from a Barry Smith comic. Right there, that serpent, jeweled serpent head, that's straight from a Barry Smith issue that I remember. So anyway, and there, this whole double-page spread is a Barry Smith double-page spread, crudely redrawn with an aardvark added.
Well, it's funny. I mean, even if you look at like kind of the front of the trade to the back of the trade and how Cerebus is drawn, it's different.
Yeah, no, by near the back of the trade, it's a very good art, actually. Mm-hmm. And very detailed and controlled, and early on the lines look kind of shaky and crude, like there.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about Cerebus. If you see someone who wants to be a serious comic collector, they always seem to have this on the shelf.
I did not read all of Cerebus. I used to think I was hardcore because I was reading Cerebus early on, but I did not stick with it.
Well, that's okay. Now, if you've read all of Spawn, that's the hot thing.
That's the hot thing.
Which I'm going to start getting Spawn issues.
You read a lot of Spawn, right? You were collecting it quite a while back.
Yeah, I read through a chunk of trades and I kind of put it down. I need to get back to it, but it won't be a while.
Then you were pissed off because not all of it was in trades. And a lot of it was such a low print run that it was hard to find at an affordable price.
I just couldn't find a huge chunk of it, so it just kind of made it kind of less.
And now that it's become cooler again, I wonder if Spawn has become more expensive again.
I almost wonder if that would push them to do trades, because I know like they've pushed to do more Savage Dragon trades and stuff like that. And with renewed interest, I imagine there might be more market for them to go through and do trades for stuff that is otherwise impossible to find unless you buy it off Comixology.
Yeah. Do you think it's all on Comixology?
I'm pretty sure it is. I just you're paying $3 an issue or whatever.
Right. Well, usually $2 an issue, but still. But then you wait when they have a 50% off sale, and you can pay $1 an issue. But you don't digital. I mean, so obviously you want it physical.
I mean, if I'm going to buy like that, yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Right now, I have plenty of other 100-issue runs to read. So.
And do you really want to read all of Spawn?
Right.
It might be more fun just to own them and have them in a box than to read them. Or maybe I'm being too cruel to Spawn.
I don't know. I'm going to get some of the new issues for a while and see how that goes. Through the service, it's like $1 an issue. So.
I feel slightly guilty that I finally dropped Savage Dragon. I've been following it for about 25 issues. And I really admire him for doing this project, as a life's work and everything. Mm-hmm. But I just was starting to get not exactly bored, but it just felt like the story felt too recursive after a while. And I felt like I had enough for a while. I might come back to it 10 issues from now or something.
If Savage Dragon isn't your thing, that's okay.
Well, it was like for a while, and then I stopped liking it. But I like his writing much better than Todd McFarlane's writing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sorry, all you Todd Father fans.
Cool.
Okay, well, I think we're both tired, and you probably have babies to go spank. So yeah. I'm gonna end the recording on YouTube, and
all right,
we'll see everyone later. We'll be back probably pretty soon, I'm guessing, with magic.
Sure, sounds good.
Bye-bye.
Toodaloo.